Hi everyone, welcome back to Fillers and Filters. So I hope you're enjoying this series on verbal and nonverbal communication as much as I do. Now, if you still haven't watched the two other videos, make sure that you do them because it will actually help you understand this topic more. So previously, I have discussed the differences between verbal and nonverbal communication, as well as the different nonverbal communication signals that convey certain meanings. I have discussed that in detail in the previous video. Now, in this video, let's talk about the different functions of nonverbal communication. Let's talk about the different functions of nonverbal communication. Why are they important? Why you should take control, or you should try to be more aware of your nonverbal signals. So number one, nonverbal signals or nonverbal communication can simply repeat what you're saying. So that, say for instance, you would say number one. So I already said one, which is the verbal message, and then one, okay? This is the nonverbal signal that says one. So it simply repeats the verbal message. Or say for instance, when a friend asks you and you answered yes, okay? So by nodding your head, you're actually simply repeating the verbal message. So that's number one function, you simply repeat the verbal message. Now, number two, which is somewhat related to the previous one, would be nonverbal communication or nonverbal signals can replace verbal communication. So in any circumstance where you cannot give a verbal reply, so for instance, I don't know, you might be busy, so you can simply nod to say yes, or shake your head to say no, or shrug your shoulders to say, I don't know, or I don't care. All right, so you can use nonverbal signals to replace verbal messages. Then the next function of nonverbal communication is to complement the verbal message. Now, when we say complement, that means you're able to make your message stronger by using other nonverbal signals. So that, for instance, you are extremely happy that you got a 1.0, the highest grade in oral communication or in purposive communication, then you can possibly say, I'm so happy, while what? Smiling and jumping and laughing. So smiling or laughing and jumping are actually nonverbal signals that complement the verbal message that you are happy. So we have said that nonverbal communication can it can simply repeat or duplicate the verbal message. It can replace the verbal message. It can complement, that means it can improve the verbal message, and then it can also accent or emphasize, give emphasis to the verbal message. Say for instance, you wanted to emphasize something, you can use the tone of your voice or the loudness of your voice. You can use hand gestures to emphasize something. Okay, so that means nonverbal signals or nonverbal communication can actually accent, okay, or emphasize certain parts of the verbal message. Now, also, nonverbal communication can regulate the communication process. Now, when we say regulate the communication process, it gives the other person a signal in terms of the turn-taking in the conversation. When we say turn-taking, again, if you haven't watched the other videos that I have uploaded, turn-taking would mean when people take turns to listen and take turns to speak. how would you know when it's your turn to speak? Okay, using nonverbal communication, you can actually help regulate the communication process, or you can actually help ensure that the communication process is organized, is free-flowing, and is effective. So say for instance, in a classroom, how does the teacher ensure that the communication process is successful? So for instance, she wants to ask students to recite, then she might use her hand to point to whoever she wants to recite. Or for instance, on the part of the student, when he or she wants to take the floor, he or she may raise her hand to be recognized to recite, that is. So now these nonverbal signals can actually regulate the communication process. And somehow, simply by looking at the other person, you would know, you have that instinct, you would know instinctively when it's your turn to speak, simply by observing the nonverbal cues or nonverbal signals of the other person. Perhaps if she took a pause or she kept quiet for some time, then maybe it's your turn to speak. Or perhaps when she asks you a question, so rising intonation, which again is also part of nonverbal communication, then of course you're obliged or you're encouraged to give a response. And lastly, nonverbal communication can also contradict the verbal message. Now, what are examples of nonverbal communication contradicting the verbal message? Could be, saying that you are actually confident, but your posture says otherwise. So, for instance, your friend asks if it's okay with you for her to borrow your dress or something, and you would say, yeah, it's okay, but your facial expression actually says otherwise. Then that would be the verbal communication or nonverbal communication contradicting the verbal message, that is. So that, say for instance, sarcasm can be a good way of demonstrating contradictory verbal and nonverbal signals. So that, say for instance, I have a very difficult class, and I would say, you know what, I really love this class. So you'd actually note that based on the tone of my voice, based on my facial expression, the verbal message is actually the opposite of my nonverbal communication, or my nonverbal signals, that is. Usually, when there are contradictory verbal and nonverbal signals, it's usually the nonverbal signal that is the truer, quote-unquote, message, because usually nonverbal signals are subconscious or unconscious. When we say subconscious, that means it's hard to control, or unconscious, you cannot really control. So yes, so those are the functions of nonverbal communication. So first, nonverbal communication can repeat the message or the verbal message. It can replace the verbal message. It can complement or accent the verbal message. It can contradict the verbal message. And lastly, it can also regulate the communication process. So again, if you happen to have questions, please make sure that you share them in the comment section below. And hopefully I can help you out by coming up with another video perhaps, or by simply responding to your comments, that is. So again, hopefully you have learned something in this video. Don't forget to like my videos. I mean, of course, you need to view them first. Like them if you have learned something. Subscribe to my channel. And of course, click that notification bell if you want to be notified once new content becomes available. So thanks again, everyone, for watching. Au revoir.